Well, thank you, Rachel and Pam and everybody else for setting this up. To me, this is a great opportunity to come and talk to the future that are going to be driving everything that we're doing in our society, not just Social Security and Medicare, but all the rest. It's going to be on your shoulders soon. So anything that we can impart by way of information to help you out in that gigantic task, hopefully will be good. Some amazingly great questions and at the last panel. It was really, really good to hear them. And I actually have a little bit of information here. I got 3 slides to start out with here that actually sort of get a little bit of bookkeeping out of the way. And by the way, on the last panel, we had, Kathleen, Nancy, and Susan, wonderful speakers. So now, you've got to have a little shot of boring numbers and stuff. So here's the boring numbers part, and then Hans will come in and he'll tell you all the interesting stuff. But anyway, one little boring number thing, somebody actually raised this question last time, is what's this recession doing to us? And first of all, on the chart right after this is kind of like what a recession looks like. You see the little pinkish line here up on towards the top? That's what we were projecting in 2008. The gross domestic product would look like. It'd be growing at a nice steady pace. Whoops, little hiccup there. In 2008 it didn't do quite as well, and in 2009 it's doing not at all as well, it actually dropped and is staying at a lower level, and it's taken quite a while to recover back to the same level that it was before in our current projections. The Office of Management and Budget for the budget has, fairly similar kind of recession. Everybody does because we're already in it, and this is tough. A way that this shows up in Social Security. Somebody asked about the cash flow for Social Security. For the year 2009, this is, I think, calendar year 2009, we were projecting a little over a year ago, when nobody was talking about a recession, an $86 billion cash flow surplus. That is our tax income that Kathleen was talking about, just payroll taxes and taxes on benefits. That's another little chunk we get. The total tax income was going to exceed the cost of the program, we thought, by about $86 billion. Pretty good, right? That doesn't even count the interest. Well, as it turns out, now we're projecting it's only going to be about a $19 billion excess. And the reason is that loss of money in there, that $68 billion loss, about 2/3 of it, $46 billion of it, is because of less tax revenue coming in. That's kind of like, again, it's what a recession does. Fewer people working. Some of the people who are working not making as much as they did, so they don't pay as much taxes. So we're going to get $46 billion less taxes than we're anticipating without the recession, but also about $22 billion more in the way of benefits than we were expecting, partly because more people are filing for disability benefits. Also, more people are filing for retirement benefits. You lose your job, got to eat. So what do? Maybe if you're eligible, you file for some kind of benefits, including retirement benefits. So we've seen some of that too. Also, we had that really big cost of living adjustment, which you can get a little look at here, and I won't ponder on this one too long, but for those of you who like graphs and all kinds of stuff, especially with weird discontinuities in graphs, this is just kind of a fun one, because you can see here, the one where it sort of goes way up at like a peak there. Maybe these numbers are too small. The fat diamonds on here are the quarters that we look at for the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, to determine how big the annual cost of living adjustments are for beneficiaries. And we had this one that sort of popped right up there about 1/3 of the way across, which is the 3rd calendar quarter of 2008. And we just so happened to have a 5.8% increase in the CPI for the 3rd quarter of 2008 compared with the 3rd quarter of the prior year, and that's what gave us our 5.8% cost of living adjustment. Just simple arithmetic, just follow the CPI. What's fascinating, though, is within that same year, by December, just a couple months later, remember the $4 a gallon gas we had in the 3rd quarter dropped down to like $1.50 or something like that a gallon? It's back up to over $2 now, but dropped back to $1.50. Well, this is what it looks like in the Consumer Price Index. The Consumer Price Index dropped by 5 percentage points between the 3rd calendar quarter of 2008 and December of 2008. So if we'd been calculating our cost of living adjustment that we gave people, fully 5.8% that they're receiving throughout this year, 2009, if we'd calculated instead based on the December of 2008 CPI, it would have only been 0.8% COLA instead of a 5.8% COLA. So actually, maybe this is also what stimulus looks like. People got the extra large check. Unfortunately, though, one of the things that happens, and I'm only just mentioning this doesn't really relate to the long-term cost of Social Security, but it's a topical point that you probably heard a lot about. Because that very large CPI increase and the very large cost of living adjustment occurred, you can see we had that big drop to December, And, well, okay, inflation is happening thereafter. We're projecting inflation to continue on up on the upswing, but it's going to take a while before the CPI gets once again above the level it was at in the third quarter of 2008. And by law, we don't have another COLA until it gets above that level of the third quarter of 2008. So we're projecting it's going to be 2 years of zero COLAs, and that's not because there's no inflation. Yeah, from December there's been inflation, but it's going to take that long in our projections to get back up to as high as it was in the third quarter. So you could look at it as no COLAs because people got this really amazingly wonderful COLA for the December of 2008, and no COLAs in the next 2 years. So just so you're sort of aware of what's happening on that. Now let's flip quickly before I run out of time into sort of the meat of what we're talking about here today, because what I think you all have been charged with doing in a little while is to sit and say, what kind of stuff should we do to make the ends meet, to have, the benefits that we're going to want to be providing to some of the old folks and some of the young folks when you get to be older too, match up with the amount of money we have coming into the program. You've got to pay for it. So on this little chart, we have what solvency, so-called, for Social Security really looks like. Solvency is just, can we, in any given year, at any point in time, do we have enough money to pay the benefits that are scheduled? If the answer is yes, we're solvent. If we don't have enough money at that moment to pay the full benefits, then we're said not to be solvent. Well, when these lines, the so-called trust fund ratio, which is the amount of money we have in reserve, $2.4 trillion right now, a lot of money, the amount of money we have in reserve, when that amount of money is positive, and we have a positive trust fund, and here we show it as how big is that trust fund as a percentage of the annual cost of the program? Just a way of sort of, measuring what our our reserves are. Right now we have for the OESDI program we've got about, 3 times the annual cost of the program. We're projecting it's going to go up some. The blue line is the one with the recession. That's our most recent projection. You can see how much we knocked off as a result of just having this recession. Recession happens, we got less money coming in, paying a little bit more out. It knocks down our trust fund some, and it's sort of a permanent drop. And as a result, in this year's trustees report, you've probably heard, the OESDI Social Security program is projected to have the trust fund run out of money a little bit earlier, in 2037 instead of 2041. A little bit more critically maybe is the DI trust fund, which is a separate entity, as Susan was talking about, and has to pay its own way too. Its run out of money time is changing from 2025 to 2020, 5 years earlier, and that's getting to be pretty soon. But this next slide really tells you, so what really does that mean, running out of money in the trust fund? It doesn't mean that we're broke and that Social Security goes away, never to be seen again. Only Congress could do that. And imagine if you were all members of Congress, how likely you would be to vote Social Security out of existence. You would probably only do that if you really didn't care about getting reelected. And if you were members of Congress, you probably would care about getting reelected. So Social Security getting voted out of existence is probably no shot. But what this chart does show you, if you look at the blue line, which right now still, as Nancy and some others on the prior panel pointed out, and Kathleen did too, I think, the blue line, which is the cost of Social Security, compared to the reddish line, which is our tax income, again, not even counting the interest, the blue line's still below the red line. That's pretty good. We're running these surpluses, not as big as we had expected before we knew a recession was coming, but it's still, cost is less than income. But we're not expecting that to go on forever. You can see the blue line is projected to go up and start exceeding around 2016, a year earlier than we were projecting a year ago, largely again because of the recession, and sort of stays above. But you see where that fat blue line all of a sudden drops down and it just matches up with the red line? That happens in 2037, and the reason is because the law for Social Security says we may have these scheduled benefits in the law, but if we don't have the money to pay them, we don't pay them in full. We don't have the ability to just go out and pay benefits when we don't have the money to do it. Social Security doesn't have the kind of borrowing authority that the government in general has to be able to pay for stuff that it doesn't have the money to pay for. Social Security doesn't have that luxury. The law could change, we could get, ability to borrow. But if we hit 2037, Congress doesn't do anything between now and then, and we reach the point where the trust funds are exhausted, and we have, as this little box shows, in 2037, 76 cents coming in taxes for every dollar of scheduled benefits, well, that's all we're going to be able to pay, 76 cents. Now, that's not zero. It's not Social Security goes away, but it is 76 cents on a dollar from what people would be expecting. and from what we would get by having our wage index system that Nancy and others were talking about in the prior panel. So it'd be a big hit, and we expect that Congress will do something between now and then so we don't have a precipitous sudden drop in the year 2037. I mean, let's hope. And all your cards and letters and talking to all the people you talk to will probably help move that along. Another way of sort of looking at Social Security also has been discussed a lot in D.C. is like not just the solvency, but also the sustainability. Nancy and others address this point too. And sustainability, I think we usually think of the sustainability of Social Security as being really, is the public, is the country as a whole willing to pay the price for the benefits that are scheduled? I mean, that's really what sustainability is. Now, it is true that if the cost goes up to be more than all the money in the world, well, obviously that's not sustainable. But short of that, something is sustainable if it's something we can afford and we're willing to pay the price. So Social Security here, the cost and our scheduled tax revenue are shown to you here as a percentage of gross domestic product. Nancy alluded to these numbers in the prior panel. And you can see we go a little bit above 6 at our peak, and then we drop back down to about the 5.8% level. We're currently at 4.8% because of the recession. Last year we were at like 4.4% of GDP. Going from, about 4.5 up to 5.8, that's a little bit more than an extra percent of GDP. That's money. That's real money, and if we want to keep the level of benefits that are scheduled in current law, obviously we can do this. This is not an unsustainable picture here. The blue line, clearly, because it flattens out, it's not rising, it's just steady, clearly this is sustainable. This could be paid for if your elected representatives, 535 of them up the street, decide now or at some future point that, yeah, we want to sustain this level of cost and we're going to pay for it. So that's really the decision that will be coming up. Now, let me just address a little bit, because you're going to be getting into with Hans about, so what do we do about either changing benefits or getting more revenue to be able to pay for these benefits? A little bit about why it is that the cost is jumping. And you see here about how this cost curve as percentage of GDP or percentage of taxable payroll, our tax base, all of a sudden has this big hop happening between 2010 and 2030. You might say, so why is that? Well, it's because the number of beneficiaries we have for every 100 workers is rising. It's all kind of like about the demographics. So then you see the shape of this curve, which is just the ratio of beneficiaries we're projecting to the number of workers. Beneficiaries, they get the money. The workers pay the taxes. So as that jumps up between 2010 and 2030, it's kind of a level shift, and then it sort of stays at the higher level. That pretty much explains why Social Security cost goes up. It's pretty much the whole story. Now, well, why is the population aging in this way, and we're having all these extra folks, over 62 and fewer folks at working age? Is it because the baby boomers are retiring? Is it because people are living longer? You hear a lot about, well, we're aging because we're living longer, and that's going to be expensive. Or is it because of lower birth rates? The third one is the one people don't usually think that much about. But the answer actually is sort of all three. And just a quick look. If you look at the population as we're projecting it out in the future, at this little picture, the under 20 population isn't rising all that much. 20 to 64 isn't rising all that much. But if you look at to the left of the middle line, the size of the 65 and over population, how fat that white area is versus the 65 and over, you can see it gets bigger, and it gets bigger in a hurry between 2010 and 2030. Here's another way of sort of looking at this kind of distribution where we're just looking at 100% and how, and this shows even more graphically how as a share of the total population, the under 20 is shrinking, the under 65 is shrinking, and 65 plus is the big increase. Well, boomers are going to be reaching retirement age. They started, this year, last year, and they're going to be reaching over the next 20 years. And that creates a temporary bulge. But if it was just the baby boomers retiring, hey, once we get rid of them, once they all die off, it wouldn't be a problem anymore. We'd go back to where we were. But there are permanent changes. As you saw, this cost curve jumps up over the next 20 years, and then it stays higher. So this is a permanent effect. It's not just because the baby boomers happened. Other reasons, well, living longer. Yeah, we're living longer. That's been sort of a gradual process and will continue. That's had some effect. Death rates have been declining. Life expectancy is increasing. Here's a little picture of how we project death rates. They've been dropping in the past, and we project they're going to continue dropping. Good thing, we all want to live longer and hopefully healthier too. Life expectancy is rising. Interesting thing on this, you might sort of look at the life expectancy at birth or at 65. And between 1980 and 2010, actually women have stopped pulling away from men. Interesting story here. Men have started to, close a little bit of the gap. Back in 1980, even when we were making these projections, everybody was yelling and screaming at us, especially in the demographic community, about how, well, women have been pulling away. They've been improving their life expectancy faster than men, so that's going to go on forever, right? And we said, no, let's just project them about the same rate. Lo and behold, it turns around over the last 20, 25 years. But we project that to not continue. There's lots of reasons for that. Women stopped smoking as much at a later time than men and all that kind of stuff. But we don't have time to go into all that today. The bottom line is we are projecting people will be living longer, and that's a good thing, living healthier too. But the really big factor that's going to impact our cost over the next 20 years, the reason for this level shift is really birth rates. And this is important when you're thinking about what you might want to do to benefits or taxes, where you might want to go to affect Social Security to understand why it is that the cost is actually going up. The birth rates dropped from the baby boom era. And immigration, actually, we've had increases in immigration. That's helped a little bit because that's another way to bring extra folks into the population at young ages to be able to pay taxes. They can be born here, or we can bring them in at relatively young ages. Here's a look at the birth rates, and the red line is what we usually look at for the total fertility rate, which is the average number of kids a woman would expect to have during her lifetime. You can see in the baby boom, it averaged like over 3. Historically, it was over 3 historically. It dropped down to actually below 2 in the 1970s, and it's about stabilized around 2 kids per woman. This is a big change. Think of it in terms of if you are just going to be supported by your kids versus other generations. Generations that had 3 kids to support the parents in their old age versus future generations that have only 2 kids to support them in their old age. That's a big difference. That means those 2 kids have to either put 1.5 times as much money on the table to support their parents, or the parents are going to live off of only 2/3 as much. Take your pick. Really quickly, some of the other kinds of things that we look at are dependency ratios, which you perhaps have all heard about. The total dependency ratio looks at under 20, because, workers have to pay for their kids too, and 65 and over, divided by the number of working people. The age of dependency ratio is the thing we care more about for Social Security because it's largely aged and disabled. But if we look at 65 and over divided by working age, you can see up through 2010, hey, these are looking pretty good. Looks like no trouble at all, right? We jump up to including just through 2030, the period of this big transition. We put in little dashed lines here to show what if there was no increase in life expectancy, no reduction in birth rates at all between now and 2030. And you can see the little dashed lines, they don't look very much different. It's all about the shift in birth rates getting lower. That's what's causing the level shift up to higher levels of cost for Social Security. Now, when we go out and we go all the way out to 2085, you can see the dashed lines now start to sort of, look a little bit lower, so that after about 2030, the continuing sort of higher level of Social Security cost is supported by people living longer and longer. But the big shift, this sort of massive one-time level shift, is all really about the birth rates. It's not just about people living longer. So how is all this affecting us? We're going to have fewer people of traditional so-called working age. Those workers are going to have to support more quote-unquote dependents, or we're going to have the folks start working earlier. Well, education's important, so that's probably not going to happen so much. Or they're going to have to start working for a longer period of time. Just put in there's a lot of talk in the last session also about Social Security versus Medicare, and here's just a little picture where you can see the Social Security going all the way back to about 1970, its cost as a percentage of GDP, gross domestic product, and it's been sort of hanging around that 4.5%, and we again have the level shift because the birth rates dropped. It's really the whole story. You can see the same thing on the Medicare costs, but instead of going up to our 5.8%, Medicare is going from a current of about 3.8%. They actually cost less than Social Security right now, projected to go up to like over 11% by the end of 75 years for Medicare. So a big difference, and that's the cost per person and medical costs. That's another discussion that you've heard a lot about, and we'll hear much more of. So what do we do? Aging population, again, mainly from fertility. It's not about just people living longer. Fewer workers. We're going to have to make a decision. We're going to have actually lower consumption for everybody, and we've got to decide how to distribute it. So either, again, remember, think of that model of now there are only 2 kids for the parents instead of 3 kids. So those kids are going to have to either put half again more, a half again larger share of their earnings on the table to pay for the parents, or the parents are going to have to live on 2/3 as much. And this is just arithmetic. There's nothing much we can do about that. And the real key is that the political balance will determine this. It's what the people out in the districts all around the country are talking about to the 435 members of the House, 100 members of the Senate. They're going to come in, they're going to make all the decisions. They're going to vote on this stuff based on what they hear from people in their districts. And if people say, taxes, we just don't want to have any taxes, then benefits will have to be cut. If they say that, these benefits are important and we want to have benefits at this level, or as Nancy suggests, even a higher level, they're going to have to be willing to put money on the table and pay for the taxes. So it's a pure choice. It's really very straightforward, and we'll just see how it all plays out. I think Hans is going to lay out some possible things for you to consider about where we go. So thank you all very much.